Hey guys, it's Richard. It's Friday. We've got an LS shootout. We've got the 6 liter versus a 6.2 liter. Is the bigger motor really better? In this video, we're going to compare the 6 liter LY6 to the larger 6.2 liter LS3. Just to make the competition fair, we equipped both of them with the factory LS3 camshaft. The LY6 originally came with variable cam, but so we could compare just the displacement, we equipped it with a factory LS3 cam. We also compared these two after we modified them both, again, with the same aftermarket comp cam. The final question is, what would happen if we did this comparison under boost? When it comes to making power, bigger really is better. So if given the choice and they were both free, obviously we would all choose the larger 6.2 liter LS3 over some other smaller 6 liter version. In fact, the only thing we would choose more than the 6.2 liter LS3 would be a 7 liter LS7, but the odds of you finding one of those in the wrecking yards are very few and far between there. And even really with the aluminum LS3, an all aluminum 6.2 liter is very, very rare and hard to find in the wrecking yard. I've never seen one. In fact, I very rarely see the 6 liter stuff. So this begs the question, if we want the 6.2 liter, we want the all aluminum motor, but what happens if we have to settle for the 6 liter? How much less power does the 6 liter make compared to the all aluminum glitzy LS3 motor? So I have this comparison. We can kind of take a look at it. The first thing that we did was I obviously selected a 6 liter. Now is the 6 liter run with the same style rec port heads as run on the LS3. The valves are a little bit different, but we ran both of these basically stock and then with a cam upgrade, a cam and spring upgrade, so we can kind of compare and see what happens to the displacement. Now with the 6 liter, I chose an LY6, which is an iron 6 liter truck block equipped with the rec port heads. The difference is that the LY6 was originally equipped with a variable cam and the LS3 is not. So what we did was remove the variable cam, because I removed those before we did a bunch of testing because we couldn't control the variable cam. So what I did was we simply put an LS3 cam in the 6 liter just to make it easy and kind of make it an apples to apples comparison. We ran the 6 liter LY6 with the LS3 cam, and then we also ran the 6.2 liter LS3, obviously, with the LS3 camshaft. So it's a good comparison, so we can find out just what the displacement does, although there is a slight change in compression too, because the LS3 obviously has more displacement, and it also has a flat top piston. So you can factor that in as well, because there is going to be a change in compression. But this was our LY6 6 liter equipped with the rec port heads with the LS3, the factory LS3 camshaft, and we ran it both with the stock LY6 truck intake manifold, the truck rec port intake manifold, and the LS3 intake manifold, and the power curves were identical. So if you have an LY6 or some truck version of the 6 liter, that truck manifold works very well. If it will fit where you're putting it, it works just as well. There's no reason to have to step up and buy the LS3 intake manifold. So run in this configuration with the Holley HP management system and long tube headers. These were 1 7/8 on our 6 liter LY6 with the LS3 cam. Our combination produced 475 horsepower, 474.7, and peak torque of 468.9, so we'll call that 469 foot-pounds of torque. And here's what happened when we installed an LS3 onto the dyno, run in the same configuration. We ran it with long tube headers, we ran it with no accessories on it, just the water pump, the open throttle body with a Holley HP management system. Obviously, both of these were run on 91 pump gas, and they were both optimized for timing and air fuel. Here's what happened when we ran our stock LS3. Basically, that's an LS3 crate motor, and they're rated at 430 to 435. But when we run them colder, and as I said, no accessories and no factory exhaust and all that stuff. So they make more power the way that we run them than what they're rated at by the by GM. So the factory LS3 with the LS3 camshaft made 495.8, so 496 horsepower, and 491 foot-pounds of torque. So as we would kind of expect, the bigger motor with even slightly more compression basically just makes more power everywhere compared to the smaller 6 liter. Even though they have the same camshaft, they have the same cylinder heads, they have the same intake manifold, and the power difference is obvious because one of them just has more displacement. So now that we've run these in stock trim, let's find out what happens when we run them in a modified trim. After running our comparison between the 6-liter and the larger 6.2-liter in effectively stock trim, we decided to also compare them after they've been modified. So what we did was take both of these motors and install a camshaft. In fact, we installed the same camshaft. It was the Comp 459 camshaft, which was a 54-459-11, and that's a 617, 624 lift split, a 231, 239 degree duration split, and a 113 degree lobe separation angle. Yes, 113. Now you'll notice that this is a cathedral port cam, and oh no, what are we going to do? This is a rec port head, but it works just fine. We've run both this and the 469 cam on both the 6-liter and the 6.2. They do exactly the same thing. All it does is rock the curve a little bit. The one with more exhaust duration makes a little bit more out at the peak or out past the peak, and a little bit less way down low, down in the 32 to 3300 RPM range. They make the same peak torque. In fact, the curves lay over each other. It's a direct layover. So there's not a big change between those two camshafts on either one of these combinations. So what we did was run that 459 cam. Obviously, we also upgraded the valve springs on the rec port heads. Otherwise, we ran it in the same configuration that we'd run the stock ones, with the long tube headers, the Holley management system. Both of these had the same 92 millimeter manual throttle body on them. So run with our camshaft on the 6-liter, the combination produced 541 horsepower and 492 foot-pounds of torque. So it did well. It picked up quite a bit of power with the cam upgrade. And for those guys that want to see just how much that gain was, you can see it here. That's the 6-liter with the LS3 cam versus the 6-liter with the Comp, the 459 cam. So it picked up quite a bit. But let's see what happened when we ran the same camshaft in our LS3. And as you can see, it did a similar thing that it did when these things were stock, when we were run with a stock cam. The added displacement and increased compression offered by the LS3 basically just made more power everywhere, and that's kind of exactly what we would expect. So equipped with that camshaft, 566 horsepower on the LS3, and peak torque checked in at 517 foot-pounds. So you can see, again, kind of railroad tracks, a little bit bigger gain down low, down at 3,000 RPM, but effectively this thing, the displacement continues to hang on and make more power even when we add these camshafts. So the little 6-liter, a lot of guys were concerned with on the 6-liter, well, does it shroud the valves? Do we start losing airflow at the top? And that's not what's happening here. As you see, both of them, when we were running with a stock cam and with this aftermarket cam, we see a similar kind of difference between the two. So that aspect is obviously not rearing its ugly head. Now, I know everybody's question now is, okay, yeah, but what happens now when we run boost? And unfortunately, I don't have the 6-liter with this cam run under boost, because we never did that. We ran it in a bunch of other configurations. Obviously, we also ran it in the Big Bang configuration where we made 1,000,000 horsepower. But I did run the LS3, and if you look at this curve right here, and then don't look at these numbers over on the side, and that's what the difference would be if we ran them at the same boost. I'll show you what happened when we ran. As a matter of fact, I guess I can show you that now. Here's what happened when we ran the LS3 at about 6.5 or 7 pounds of boost. And you can see it makes lots of power as we would expect it to, and that's the nice thing about a cammed LS3. It's already making good power, so it already made 566 horsepower, and you don't have to add very much boost, and all of a sudden we're over 800 horsepower. As a matter of fact, we're closer to 825, and we're at 771 foot-pounds of torque. We had a slightly decreasing boost curve. It went from a peak of 7 at the torque peak down to about 6.6 or 6.5 out at the power peak. But even still, it made a ton of power run with the supercharger or run with the turbo. And we also had obviously an air-to-water intercooler, and all of that worked very well. And unfortunately, as I said, I don't have the 6-liter. But if you look at the railroad track curves between the 6.2 and the 6.0, were we to run the identical boost numbers on the 6.0, it would mirror what's happening here on the NA curve. It would just make less power at the same boost than the 6.2 does, because the 6.2 makes more power NA. So if we just add boost to that, it's just a multiplier. So it would continue to do that. So that's what happens when we compare a 6.2 versus a 6.0. So let's get to our conclusion and figure out, do you really need the bigger motor? In all honesty, it shouldn't come as a big surprise that a bigger motor, especially one with higher compression, makes more power. And that's exactly what we saw comparing a 6-liter to an aluminum LS2. The LS2, or the LS3 rather, makes more power because it's a 6.2-liter motor compared to a 6-liter. Bigger makes more power, especially when you toss in the fact that it has a little bit higher compression. It's definitely going to make more power. And it's also because it's aluminum and it's bigger, it's going to be a lot more desirable. And we see that in the pricing on these things. Now, obviously, if you go to a wrecking yard and you find one and the 6.2 liter is the same price as a 6-liter or 5.3 or 4.8, definitely get the aluminum bigger motor because they're very, very desirable. But here's the thing, is the extra power that they offer, and we saw from the dyno results, they do offer extra power, is that extra power worth the extra cost? Because normally when we see these things for sale, the larger 6.2-liter aluminum motor sells for and is more desirable than the iron 6-liter blocks. So you have aluminum, it's bigger, it's more desirable, it costs more. So is the additional power really worth the extra cost? When we toss boost into the equation, it actually, in my opinion, goes the other way in favor of the 6-liter, because when you have boost, let's say we have a 1,000 horsepower turbo, both of those motors can make 1,000 horsepower without any problem at all. And so you've effectively offset the ability of the larger motor to make more power, because the turbo ultimately is going to determine what they do, and both of them can do that. And the extra power offered by the 6.2, you just turn it up a pound on the 6.0 and you have that. And if you have that for less money, that's definitely the way to go. The other thing to think about, if you're going for maximum power, and let's say you're putting 2,000 horsepower turbos on your iron block like we did on the Big Bang motor, then for me, there's no choice. We very rarely ever go more than about 1,000 horsepower on an LS1, an LS2, or an LS3 aluminum block. Now, the exceptions to that aluminum block rule for us are like the L33 and the LC9, the 5.3 aluminum blocks. Those can be turned up all the way. But we don't normally do that on the LS1, 2, and 3 blocks. So the iron block becomes even more desirable, and maybe not necessarily with the rec board heads, but with that, whatever head you choose, the 6-liter becomes more desirable because you can make more power with the iron block than you can, at least I think, than the aluminum LS3 block. So there you go. When it's naturally aspirated, maybe pick the big motor depending on the price. When it's turbocharged, pick the smaller motor. I'm Richard Holder, guys. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. More testing coming up.